Hello, I'm Dr. Veirdre Jackson, the CEO and creative of Living Strong Consulting, and welcome to another episode of The Flip Side of Adversity. I have some questions for you. Have you ever felt like you are completely drained and you're the only one that people are coming to? Have you actually felt like you're struggling with burnout, you're struggling with compassion fatigue, and the emotional toll of always being the strong one is taking you under? What if the secret to stronger caregivers is actually developing a network of support that says helpers need help too? You know what? Let's talk about it. We'll be right back. Trauma, toxic stress, broken habit, and hurting heart don't define destiny, but peace isn't passive. It requires an exchange. To create a flip and access peace in the middle of the pieces, you are challenged to make an exchange of the lies that have kept you mentally hostage in basement moments. Resilience isn't about bouncing back, but bouncing forward. Living Strong, the flip side of adversity, brings powerful stories and fearless conversations from experts in the field of business, relationships, emotional, physical, and mental health, and faith-based communities. Each episode creates a brave space with powerful tools from authentic connections. Tune in as we dig in with Dr. Jackson on the flip side of adversity. So, I just want to start off by saying, have you ever had one of those moments where that small voice tells you, go over and talk to that person, and you try to struggle with it because you have all of the things on the inside? She doesn't know you, she doesn't know who you are, she doesn't know your name. Why are you going to go up and bother her? I had one of those moments, and now I feel like, no pun intended, I have a kindred spirit. I have a kindred soul that really understands the things that I am passionate about. And when she said yes, it was just confirmation. So we met at the Ochdale Home Visitors Conference. She was the keynote speaker and so honestly, authentically shared her story and allowed everyone in the room to become transparent and vulnerable. So I absolutely said we have to have a flip side of adversity conversation, but not just a conversation around general flips, but the flip for the caregiver. Mm-hmm. So let me give you a little bit about who she is so you even further understand why I asked her. So Veirdre Kressler is next to me. She is a dedicated advocate, educator, and mental health professional with over 17 years of experience. Veirdre's passion for creating trauma-informed and integrative care programs has transformed support systems for first responders, healthcare providers, educators, and others who are in high-stress professions. Veirdre is one of the youngest clinicians nationwide to receive training and certification as an evidence-based violence prevention trainer and educator under the Office of Violence Prevention at the American Psychological Association in Washington, D.C., and as the founder of the Kindred Way Wellness Collective. Veirdre is leading the charge to provide peer support and resilience building for those who are always helping others. I am so honored and so excited to have you on the flip side of adversity. Welcome to the show, Veirdre Kressler.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
Yes.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I think it's time to have a conversation, right?
Yes.
And I have to agree and have to tell you that when I was sitting at the table getting ready, shaking to do my keynote, and thank you for your gracious, kind regard. I was texting my brother who was upstairs in the hotel room getting things ready, and I was like, there's this woman here, and she just floats across the room, and I want to be like her when I grow up. So I am, all the pleasure and honor is mine. And thank you for making space for a dialogue that has touched my life in a deep and profound way, and that I have been called to share with communities of folks like me and like you and people who took oaths to educate, treat, serve, lend, help, heal. It's time to have a conversation.
And I love, and I share this with you over coffee, that not only do you have such a beautiful just soul and authenticity to you, but you have receipts. Like, you are an expert in the field. So it's not, it's the compassion, but it's the credentials as well. And as we chatted over coffee, I feel like we're going to have a conversation that, just like that day in the ballroom, will allow people to take a breath and become honest. So let's jump into it. I want to actually go right into what inspired you to create a space that will leverage peer support for those who are professionally caregivers and are on the front line giving.
Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Real and deep. It's real and deep. So a little bit of backstory about myself. I come from 3 generations of professional academic nurses. And my grandparents who raised me, helped to raise me, were X-ray technicians. And so I come from a family faith system by origin, and value for education and healthcare profession. And I was steeped in that deeply. And I knew growing up that I wanted to help other people. I had a calling as a little girl that I wanted to help. I used to watch Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and it was my favoriteest show. And I used to watch ER and get lost in it, even at age-appropriate stages of development, and knew that I was called to a high-stakes space, and I wanted to do teamwork and help people. And part of this conversation, right, that is a developing one, and I think is so vital, especially post-COVID, is that research indicates that educators, helpers, healers, teachers, we have our stuff. We have our unfinished, usually, stuff, whether that comes from a space of dogmatic steeping in beliefs, whether that comes from adverse childhood experiences, right? For me, I had an ACE score of 12 before I was 9, right? And so behind the scenes, helpers have story, and they have transgenerational trauma, and they have history, and that's part of why we function, right? Elegantly, gracefully, adaptively. That's why we run into fires, right? That's why we climb trees and get cats. That's why we herd children for 8 hours a day, paying out of our own pockets, not getting bathroom breaks. And so for many years, I was an accumulation of that person who came from a lot of stuff and a lot of pain, but also deeply valued community supports and integration, being a part of your community, helping heal, support, teach it, thrive. And the pandemic came, and I got sick. And even in all of my academic steeping, I heard fad language like self-care, and we'd have pizza parties, and we'd have, lunch webinars where you tried to get your notes done. And it was very well intended, but nothing ever hit what I needed it to hit. And that's true for most of us. We don't have the time, we don't have the resource. And I found myself post-COVID in early 2023, very burnt out, profoundly full of vicarious trauma, I had been traditionally abstinent from, I'm a person in long-term recovery. I had been traditionally abstinent from narcotics and alcoholic for 17 years. And all of a sudden, I found myself paid at $150,000 a year, very well adjusted, very achieved, right, in my career, had just accepted a 4 under 40 award from my alma mater. And I wanted to die. Like, I wanted to die. And I became suicidal. And the systems, when I turned to them for help, I made too much money. I didn't have enough money. I had to meet a $5,000 deductible. Or I had to cheapen the quality of my care and risk receiving the care that I needed with people I had treated, my patients and my students. Luckily, I come from a robust circle of chosen family who I could get really vulnerable and honest with. And they fundraised in 24 hours the money I needed to go to treatment. And here's the thing, when I got to treatment, I didn't know what to expect. And what I found there were many, many, many people like you and I who had the same story. And just because we had the privilege to meet the bottom line of $75,000 for 28 days of treatment, we were afforded the care we needed. And then I went back to work and found a lot of people are hurting.
Yeah.
A lot of people are hurting.
Yeah. And I feel like the intensity of that is just continuing to build. And so you mentioned the financial barrier. When you think about that, oftentimes those who have gotten into the field of caring, of serving, of supporting, and even in some cases, like leading entire communities, ministries, all of these things, it comes from a source of something that they felt they didn't receive, so they now have an opportunity to give it or serve it to others. Besides the financial barriers, what are some other barriers that you are seeing or have gained an understanding about that creates this almost inaccessible access to the mental health supports that caregivers need?
We need a second episode.
We need more than one.
in short, a few bullet points to answer your question. Credibility, right? And so like the higher your degree, the more terminal your degree, the higher the stakes, not just in application, but the higher the stakes on the spirit, right? The higher the stakes tied to the identity, the higher the stakes tied to security, a sense of belonging and purpose. Credibility is a big one. Am I going to have a way back? Am I going to be trusted? Can I facilitate good care under the stress of being new again or feeling like eyes are on me? What if I fail, right? What if I stumble and have a bad day and the remediation board pulls a urine and my career is over? Credibility is a big one. Trust in the system is another. So I am a little bit of a radical in my field in that I have avoided carrying an LPC license for a very long time. And that's because I don't like confinement. And it's also because, as someone who's done a lot of social research, our licenses hold us to profound agreements and oaths. But when you look at these crisis situations, specifically for MDs, DOs, RNs, PhDs, licensed mental health professionals, the process it's a rigorous comeback, right? And it's a rigorous consequence, and it feels like a consequence. And again, the higher you go in that degree and the higher the liability and risk, the deeper the shame. And so there's a lost trust in the system that is when many of us go for help, myself included, and it's not there. There's this sudden crisis of realization that's like, wait, I studied 12 years, passed boards, paid a lot of money to do that. Every year renew a license to a board, right? I pay money to an ethics committee. And like, where are my resources?
Right. My resources.
My resources.
My resources.
Where are they for me, right? The person that signed up, took the oath, said to the hospital system or university, I promise to do this and do no harm, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're billing my hard work. You're billing my license. You're billing my NPI. You're billing me as a teacher who has to meet a rubric in a school district. But when I'm burnt out, it's a consequence, a threat, a lot of money, and many barriers. Or 3 free EAP sessions provided by someone of a lesser lived and professional experience than myself.
Right.
And it's not good enough.
There's so much in what you just shared. What immediately resonated with me, you used the word credibility. I also connect that to the credibility of what I've earned, but also what I then believe about myself. All of the I should be doing something better. I should not be in this place. Something is wrong. I'm not enough. I've done this wrong. When that's not the case.
Right.
You are bearing witness to so much pain, crisis, that, and I chuckled when we talked about this over coffee. Oftentimes just letting people know you are not crazy. There's actually a name for what you are experiencing in your mind, in your body, and in your soul. Yes. When you consider, so you've spoken about this concept of compassionate confrontation. What does that mean, and why is it important?
I think that we forget that many of us went into a system because we were angry. I know I did. I know that I did that. I said, I have a bone to pick with somebody or something. I have questions that people aren't answering for me. And I'm going to take a career path towards becoming a psychologist and an academic so that I can get some answers and maybe help correct the thing that existentially bothers me in the system. And I think that that's true for many of us, right? For like a good Samaritan-minded person, it's how can I take something I love? How can I contribute to something bigger than myself and make it better? And I've learned in my anger that there is a space where we can hold space and sit down and have a difficult dialogue and do it with compassion and do it with grit and frustration and confrontation, but do it eye to eye and explain, if this doesn't happen, if there isn't a shift or change, the load of moral injury that we are facing, especially now in our current world climate, the load of moral injury that we are facing, if we continue to not talk about it, there's a fine line between avoidance and being complicit. And I'm done living in that space.
And I would even go the next step to say, if we continue to ignore it, there is going to be a cost that's going to affect the entire system. And then at that point, people say, oh, well, what happened? No, this was clear.
Right.
And that concept of compassionate confrontation, we don't have to get ugly to be clear and ask for and make a stand for what's right for us to be the highest versions of the caregiver, the supporter, the educator, the leader, the doctor, the nurse. Like, it's okay to actually be clear and advocate for what's needed. Yes. When you think about kind of this concept of playing a role, oftentimes everywhere, I think especially since the pandemic, trauma-informed approaches, trauma-informed systems. So what is your take on that conversation, and how is it relevant in all of this?
I became a counselor in 2006, right as we were, the big federal spaces were making big contracts targeted at what we were then calling centers of excellence, right? And we have centers of excellence across all different systems. And they were getting these big pots of capitated funding to do X, Y, and Z in X amount of time. And with all of that comes the administrative overload on counselors and clinicians and doctors and teachers, which is the box checking administrative stuff that we don't like to do. None of us like to do.
Right.
And what we did then is we parked ourselves in that model as a system, many systems, and we've continued meeting new needs with old approaches. And so trauma-informed care, right, and TIPS was a framework that was socially researched by SAMHSA and applied to the systems. And then it became a metric for funding.
Yes.
And I have a problem with that. And here's my problem with that. If you're going to use federal dollars and empirical evidence to dictate how I treat a patient or client, but I turn to HR and say, I'm struggling in the same way that my patients are, and it's impairing my ability to show up as my best self and provide the care that you depend on for your bottom line under my license or their license, and that my patients rely on. And you answer me with, did you call the free EAP hotline?
Right. Yes.
It's incongruent.
But that's not a trauma-informed system,
No,
right?
Not necessarily.
Right? It's not just how we deliver service. And this is an ongoing conversation that I have with clients. We have to recognize it's not just in what we're doing for others, it's who we are as an organization. Yes. And how does the Kindred way desire to add value in a radically new way?
Yeah. So we believe pretty staunchly that organizations need to reevaluate, reassess, and recoil from the current model that we've been using, particularly in behavioral healthcare, but broadly across all of the systems for a long time, right? And we believe that organizations and systems need to demonstrate their vulnerability, their willingness to host or hold or have the difficult conversation, their credibility, and their reliance that they're willing to pull up a chair and actually listen to the true stakeholders who are providing the services that meet the bottom line and uphold the mission and the vision of the organization. And if you are not matching care for your staff with the same metric outcomes that you're using to take on massive amounts of federal funding, then you're doing it wrong.
Right.
If you're not willing to listen to the people who are driving your bottom line, that's an inversion in justice, right? That's not.
So this is the rub. And first of all, we are absolutely in line. I just got to lean in and allow, because I know there are people who are listening, who are leaders, who are decision makers, and they're like, well, what does that look like? We have to be more efficient. We've got people doing multiple jobs, and I don't have time for that. I just need them to do their job. How do you help an administrator who, if they are honest, are feeling the weight of this as well? How do you begin to have that conversation to cultivate understanding on what this could potentially look like?
Yeah. So we do a peer support model circle at every level. We first start with the true stakeholders, the yous and the me's, the people who are providing services, who have caseloads, who are the doctors taking on the liability in the ER, and whose licenses are being built. And we take them outside of the organization and provide for them anonymous meeting spaces in their community. And they're arriving, they're coming, right? And we're listening. And that data is driving the next approach and the next resource, which is to take the peer support intervention model into the organization that's willing. We meet with middle managers as a group, then we meet with HR as a group, we meet with administrators as a group. We're providing safely as advocating voices for that original stakeholder group. We're amplifying their message, and then we're matching it with metric and SWOT analysis, and we're saying, they're telling you how to do it. Yes. And they're the people to listen to, right? Yes. They're the crisis managers. They're the social workers. These are the resourceful people who are helping other people in the community thrive. here's your feedback. Here's next year's like needs assessment. And we're asking you as a representative and an advocate for this guy over here on the lower rung, if you're going to listen and you're ready for the challenge. And it's uncomfortable and it requires a lot of grace and a lot of willingness. But we've had a couple organizations do that, and the difference is immediate. It's immediate because the staff has been shown you're willing to get vulnerable, right? That's what we're asking most of our community stakeholders to do in receiving our services, right?
Absolutely.
Or trusting us to cut them open or mend them back together. And so if we go to the head of the house and they're not willing to listen, there's a whole different conversation to have there.
Right. So it's starting with actually creating a peer level support where those who are hurting, allowing them to feel safe enough to be honest enough about how the work itself is impacting them, but also how they are feeling injured. Allowing that space to be authentic, vulnerable, and honest. And what I love about what you just shared, because oftentimes people don't say anything because they don't want to be outed, they don't want to be pointed at, they don't want to be that one, but you then go in and you become the middle, the buffer, the protector. And then sharing the honest truth around what the needs are. And if you're going to create a strategic plan for the next 5 years, if you're going to actually look at the needs assessment for programming the following year, you're challenging leaders to not only look at programming that has to do with the external delivery, but it has to be equally a priority for the internal support as well.
Right.
Yes.
Why are we bearing the burden for self-care alone?
Well, I chuckled because everyone who follows and has been to any of my refill sessions know I have this running joke that a pizza party is not going to solve this.
Girl.
Stop.
Right.
Stop bringing people pizza.
That's insulting.
That's not what's going to address this. And when you consider, you referenced it earlier, the moral injury that people are experiencing or have experienced, how does the Kindred Way address how people are impacted and how it is affecting them to help them find their voice, their footing, their grounding?
Sure. So right now we're still grassroots and we're still in our growth phase, but we have some really cool things coming on board. A couple of the things we're working on is a live community where folks can tap in nationwide, right, to like a running virtual accessible peer support group. That's number one. Number two is that we're also working on facilitating things like narrative writing circles, right? So we don't want to just build a space where people can come and unload what the problem is, but find pathways to solution. And sometimes we're finding that it begins with people having an opportunity to really tell and acknowledge their story. And when you're pursuing an MD or a PhD or a master's, you don't have time to self-attend. We all know that. We've done it, right? Especially if in addition to those things, you're raising children and paying a mortgage and trying to live life and pay the bills. Like, I didn't go to therapy as a therapist until I found myself in a crisis, right? And I don't think it has to be that hard if we change some things and address them on the front end.
But you again said something. This is why she's here, y'all. She just,
Thank you.
My soul. We can't wait until I am completely depleted and falling apart to get help. If we normalize this conversation at a systems level within organizations, and there's actually an opportunity to have authentic conversations, seek out support, identify ways to address the weight of the stress before I feel broken,
Right.
that I'm able to actually continue to do the thing that I was passionate about and wanting, the whole reason why I wanted to do this in the first place.
Right. If the reinforcement and the resource is there,
Mm.
and it's of value, quality, and accessibility, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So when you think of, and I always ask this of guests, if someone is listening and they are on the front lines, they are an educator and they have been impacted, triggered, and feeling burnt out, suffering from compassion fatigue. They are a nurse that just is regretting going in for the next emergency. And they're listening right now and they want to give up. What do you say to them?
That there's hope. That, for myself, there had to be a moment of pause. For me, that moment of pause started to come when I didn't love arriving to doing the thing that I used to love arriving to do. And I think that's where it begins for most of us, is that usually, like you're saying, by the time we realize there's a problem, we're like thigh deep in the quicksand of compassion fatigue, right? And we didn't know we needed a crisis plan, and we didn't know we needed a safety plan. The kindest thing that I can say is remember why you did this, right? And for me, I had become so impaired and so sick under the sickness of the vicarious trauma, the anger, the resentment, the disenfranchisement, the betrayal of the system, that it clouded my judgment so deeply that it was just anger all the time, right? And while I wasn't taking it out on my clients, I was sure snapping at my administrators, and it was reflecting in ways that didn't make me proud. Remember why you came here. Remember that you stood and you took an oath that said you'd do no harm, and you raised your hand to say that you would serve and protect and treat and heal and nourish and nurture. And it begins here, vitally. It begins here. Remember why you came here. Remember why you did this, and take a look at counselor know thyself, physician heal thyself. Like, when did you stop doing that, right? And if they're not doing it for you, and you're not holding them to task to support you, we still took the oath that we need to do it for ourselves, right? And so there's no, as burdening as it feels and as shameful as it feels, remember why. Remember your why and apply that to yourself. Or remember your person who inspired you, to become who or what you are today, and honor yourself in the way that person would until you can for yourself. And those are things I had to progress through until I was ready to say, I'm an awarded clinician who's an alcoholic who completely railroaded my life because I didn't take care of myself and the resources weren't there for me to do it.
Yes.
And it's not so hard to say now. It's not so hard to say now.
You're on the flip side.
I'm on the flip side.
You're on the
right?
flip
And there's
side.
hope. There's hope, right?
Yes.
There's hope.
And you're holding space for those others who you're saying, it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to come on over
I
here.
need you.
Yeah.
People like me need people to say, I'm a nurse and I got a DUI yesterday.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I need to know, just like we've talked in cultural competencies, I need to know that there are people of color advancing my field. I need to know that there are safe spaces that I can go to. In the same way, I need to know that my brothers and sisters standing in the ER with me struggle just like humans when the cape is off, right?
Yes.
There is a flip side, and our free agency of helpers, we deserve to have that community and space, because we're going to schools and hospitals and clinics every day, building that for society. And where do we go for each other?
You said something in the statement that you just shared moments ago, and the word shame just leapt up and out of your conversation for me. It really just, because when we really think about and understand compassion fatigue, when I work with teams and we look at some of Dr. Charles Figley's work around compassion fatigue, it actually is predictable it is preventable,
Mhm.
it's treatable. It's
Mhm.
actually a natural part
Yeah.
of being in the field.
Yes.
So there shouldn't be shame
Right.
because it should be expected.
Right.
And so if we know that this is going to be a part of what's going to happen when people are constantly giving, then what are some things that administrative teams should be considering and preparing within their process, their routines, to support something that they know is going to show up?
I think that answer for me is probably, I have to disclaim, at this time in our world, very idealistic. But in the hopes of hope, right? I think it begins again with this a concentrated, intentional, very intentional, deliberate act in leadership that is saying and evidencing and demonstrating we have to listen now, right? And then taking that information and restructuring the way that decisions are made within an organization and identifying the decisions that should include true stakeholders, the deliverers of the service, right? And there needs to be, why there isn't, I still don't really understand, for educators, first responders, docs, nurses, all of us. I don't know why there's not, for a bunch of people who are trained in conflict and crisis intervention, I don't understand why there are not embedded natural assessments and resources in HR departments that identify when and where, right? Like, what is a matrix of impairment?
Yes.
And how do we start preventing? You said prevention. How do we do impairment prevention for our staff on the front end as like part of the benefits package?
Right.
Right? Not a pizza party and not a webinar and not a reactive, not responsive, a reactive approach to this person's a mess now and our census is going to go down and like, how are we going to bill? No, like we should be a little more considered and informed and prepared for than that. So I think it begins with administration and leadership and funding sources.
Well, I was waiting for that. I'm like, intentional money put
funding
aside.
sources,
Yes.
Right? So like, why doesn't SAM? I've been and I'm going to say it, as a therapist for 17 years, I've been schlepping trauma-informed care because it's been required in treatment plans. And we know this, right? For billing and UR. Okay, then like SAMHSA, why don't you come down here, right? And take a look at the people who are delivering these services, or Board of Education, or whomever, when we're talking about governing bodies. And why aren't those major funding sources looking at the quality of health and wellness for the provider, for the educator, for the clinician? They're looking at the bottom line and they're looking at the outcome of pretty shoddy recipient feedback forms, right? That tell nothing about the identity or the experience of being an employee for the organization, or tell nothing about the vicarious load and the nature of the role that the person's working in. So I think that there's a couple systems that need to be held accountable and have to be willing, again, to listen to this conversation and allow the people who aren't benefiting from the organization and are burning out to weigh in on, this is what we need you to hear and understand about our experience.
Being as a strong leader, being vulnerable enough to actually have those who are delivering direct services, who are physically in the classroom, who are directly on the front line, allow them to speak directly to decision makers. And I love that vision of, in the same way you receive all of the paperwork during orientation, some type of tool that will help not only you, but those who you report to have a way to be more aware when someone is heading in the direction of not being well. And you can have a conversation without them being afraid of being punished because all of a sudden they're swimming in compassion fatigue that we know was going to happen to them in the first place.
We have that predictable data.
Yes.
We're not using it effectively.
Right. So what are some of the most critical supports? So you mentioned HR, that assessment tool. Are there other critical supports that need to be embedded into the workplace?
Yeah, so I believe that something that was of a great disservice to me is the other thing that happens is you don't really ever you go through everything you need to go through to get your license, right? But I'm sure these people exist. I'm not one of those humans, and many of my fellows are not. You don't really tap back into your licensing governing body until you have to, right? Until you're in crisis, until you've made a mistake, until there's been some sort of error, if there's some sort of internal remediation. But I am I think, fairly intelligent, privileged person who didn't know what to do, right? So all of these rigorous academic programs that I went through told me, counselor, know thyself, take care of yourself, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. I was never held accountable to doing that. I was never availed on top of 600-hour practicums and working 11 to 7 and going to class 7 to 3 p.m. I was never told, if something would happen, this is what this experience would look like. Start normalizing these things at the education level. And you know that this is the 2-day conversation where I believe that what really needs to happen is there needs to be a cross-system conversation about this, right? Because would the data change on the tendency of individuals from a high ACE score to go into caretaking roles? Not necessarily, but would the self-actualization change if sitting in the 2nd grade I knew that I could talk about my feelings and that I could breathe through it and that I could talk about shame, right? And that I would not then develop perfectionism and thrive my sense of worth and value on my performance? Probably. Data would probably indicate that the probability of changing the pathway of experience would be different if the systems de-siloed and had a conversation that is, by continuing to be siloed and not work together, not only are the systems failing the community, but now they're failing the people upholding the systems. So it's a big conversation, right? And all the systems, truly, we're individualizing them, but all the systems have to be at the table, because to me, Veirdre, the proof is when I was in that room at that Octal conference, there were tables of 10. There were about 360 people in attendance, nurse practitioners, RNs, PhDs, LPCs, social workers, state administrators. I walk the room when I do my keynote, and I do it on purpose, and I have a clicker in my pocket. There was not a single table. These were questions that I asked that ranged from, do you sing in the shower? Are you left-handed? Can you drive stick shift? All the way into, if you had a parent that died before you were 11, if you grew up in poverty, if you know what it's like to have the light shut off, if you go home and you think about your clients, patients, and students and worry that you don't have the resource, either in energy or emotion or the tangible resource to help afford them what you promised you would do, everybody in that room was standing. And I put it back on the administrators and said, look at this.
Right.
It's right. Your data is right here. And it's proof, right? This was a home visitor conference. This is Office of Child Development and Early Learning. So it's specifically early intervention and education. However, the people filling that room, their skill sets transcend and have worked in and informed every system throughout decades and decades of career time. And for many of those people, that was the first time they came up to me afterwards and said, that was the first time I was in a room of colleagues where I told people I'm an alcoholic. Or that was the first time I'm in a room of people where anybody learned that my child died of suicide. You know, and I haven't had anywhere to go with that. And that makes no sense to me.
Ah,
in the spheres of work that we work in.
yes, because we are constantly trying to help others figure
Right.
that out,
Right.
navigate it, and supporting them in a way for them to pursue healing,
Right.
but we will walk through broken.
Yeah.
When you consider what are some holistic
Mm-hmm.
supports that the workplace, or just even within the school system, what are some holistic supports that you feel are missing, needed,
Mm-hmm.
possible?
Mm-hmm. Let's start with like actual work-life balance,
Mm.
right? We don't, we're helping professions and helping spheres and fields, but I'm someone that has a couple master's degrees, almost a license, a half dozen PhD credits, and I get handed like a bank of 2 weeks, right? And usually my higher ups are 3, 4, 5 weeks work from home, remote, right? Um, we're we are trained in chaos, right?
Mm.
And so if we're not rolling back and we're not like re-educating, reassessing, reevaluating, and reorienting to something different than the way we've been steeping our providers and our helpers, it's kind of a null, moot conversation. But if we're in the sphere where organizations and agencies are willing to do that and take a look at that, I think it begins there. Like, are we adequately equipping and are we valuing the people who are coming to provide our service? Or are we lowballing them, which tends to happen, right? And limiting their resources to 3 free EAP sessions and maybe a PTO bank that includes a few sick days throughout the year. Embedding peer support in the organization that is not attached to the organization, that is not attached to HR, that is not paid by the company, that allows the individual to get paid on site, tap out, go seek support and resource live time, right? And attend to what's happening. And that attention is progressive, right? And so you come to a Kindred Way group, say it's embedded in your organization or it meets next door every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, and you say, I'm scared to go to HR. I don't know what to do. I'm in a crisis. And myself or a core committee member or someone else in the room is going to look at you and say, I've been there. Even if I haven't, I'm going to walk with you through this process. How would you like this process of recovery support to look? Right? I think the other thing too is asking individuals what they need, because it's not the same for all of us. So peer support is a big one that's not attached. It has to not be attached to the organization because it's a trust matter, right? And the organization needs to show individuals that they're willing to embed this vulnerable resource because we're providing for your wellness. We're prioritizing your wellness. I think the other thing is that all professional helpers should be afforded a true respite period, right? And so whether that's a 72-hour package of PTO or an extra week of PTO, what Kindred Way is aiming to build is a respite center and opportunities where folks from different helping professions can go away for 3 to 4 days. Really, really, and I'm not saying like go get your feet rubbed, and like eat carbs, which is great. I'm saying like be met by a licensed professional of the same caliber of your level of training and education, spend 3 or 4 days doing what you love to do. I love mountain biking and cycling. For some people, it's kayaking and hiking. Sometimes it's camping. Sometimes it is yoga and meditation and equine. But we need to be carving out those spaces where very deliberately, on a rotating regular basis that one can look forward to, there's a break. Let's normalize. Let's
Taking a
normalize
break.
a break, right? I think
Right.
about our teachers and educators who don't get breaks. They're in a high liability, high stakes environment, high stimulation with young children all day. They're held to these confining rubrics, preparing for standardized testing. They're dipping into their own budgetary resource to buy kids breakfast, buy their own supplies. They're paying off their student loans. They're trying to become parents. There's not time to go to therapy or money to afford the copay. So like, why don't we prioritize? No, this is part of your contract. Every year you're taking 72 hours of leave. We contract with this organization, Kindred Way.
Right.
And you're going to go do this thing with a team of folks and like have a built-in community that follows you that you can return to.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we are the be-all end-all solution. I will tell you we're the start, and it doesn't exist, and we're committed to making it happen.
As I'm listening to you talk about this very real need, and there have been conversations, ongoing conversations around recognizing this, the mental health day is actually the same as the physical health day that you needed. There, it's not a separate thing.
Right.
That if you're emotionally activated, charged over and over and over again, that is affecting your body. But it also requires us to have the conversation and to share the science of how they are the same thing, that I shouldn't have to pretend that I have a cough because I feel like I'm getting ready to have a breakdown if I come back into the building today.
Right.
I need to be able to actually say, this is what I need, and to have a specialized resource. So, I need people are already like, so how do we get the Kindred Way Collective?
Yeah.
So tell us, like, what is the vision? Where do you want to go with this, and how can people connect with you?
Cool. So right now we're operating truly social work grassroots. We are in the process of establishing as a nonprofit. We have an EIN and can take donations, but we're a little baby organization. We've done some cool things just in a few months, and we have a lot of outreach and a lot of demand and contact and interest. So right now we're operating in three primary buckets. And that is, first, we want to establish, there's 67 counties in Pennsylvania. Most of them are places where we could establish meetings. Many of them are rural in the northern tier. But the goal is that organizations become willing to dip their toe in the water just by saying, we'll give you space. Right? We have two places. I don't have permission to name them and wouldn't, but we have two places. One is a long-term care facility in Hershey, PA. The other is a church basement in Lancaster County, PA. But we have people coming to us and saying, we'll lend space. That's what we need. Get us on the map, right? Then we're facilitating facilitator training. So if you're someone who has a zest or a passion for building community and connection, we need folks who are willing to turn on the lights, brew some coffee, unlock the doors once a week, set up some boxes of tissues, and be there to hold space for people like us to come and talk for an hour and a half, right? The goal is to land one of those in as many counties as we can and to multiply those on a rotating basis in real time and in a virtual context. The next space is community support, advocacy, and education. This conversation needs to be had over and over and over and over again. And that's where I'm at, knocking on doors, sending letters, sending emails, writing letters to editors and saying, this happened to me. These big nationwide treatment center organizations said I'm an expert, so I'm going to use that and play that card this time around. And I'm going to I'm saying, listen to me. Please listen to me. Give me some of your time, and it's not about me. Right? I'm a privileged, light-skinned woman of color who is able to use my lived experience and the privilege of my education and academics to come forward and be vulnerable and say, this is real and it's happening, and I'm one of many, and I'm mad about it, but I compassionately would like to talk to you about how we can change that and you can be a part of it. We're doing that through things like the keynote speeches. Offering different train-the-trainer programs. Right now, the focus of Kindred Way is training facilitators how to facilitate Kindred Way programming. The next piece of that is holding, community networking events, holding spaces publicly where we're advocating with and for and alongside the helper. And we're doing that strategically, but it also happens organically at places like the Octal Conference, as evidenced by this, right? And the third sphere, and it's the most delicate and nuanced, is that social political. So Kindred Way is not aligned with any religious sort of leaning. We don't back or have any sort of political agenda. And however, we're holding our governing bodies to task. That is, we have a message. We intend to deliver it to you gracefully. We really hope that you listen to us. And if you don't, I'm going to tell everybody you refuse to. And
that's the compassionate confrontation piece. That right.
That's
right
the
there.
radical.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop talking about it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop talking about it until there's another person who feels brave enough to join me, right, and feels supported.
But you know what, Veirdre? Honestly, as I and why I felt it was so important that we have this conversation, and I truly hope it's not the last one. We will continue to have it because I feel like we are at, if not getting ready to encounter the tipping point. The amount of organizations that are talking about staff burnout, staff turnover, staff literally sick, staff having breakdowns, staff walking out, staff, you can't even find the staff person to hire. Yep. You can continue to ignore what the data is saying, and the whole system will fall apart. So it's like that moment where if we don't pay attention, it's going to radically shift everything, and you won't have a choice but to say, oh, okay, so what's that compassion fatigue thing again?
Right. Yeah. Something that I often share when I'm consulting with leadership and administration is there's an opportunity here, and the road is typically going to fork in one of two ways. And that is, we're going to welcome uncomfortable change, or we're going to be faced with tremendous casualty. Whether that's in the downfall of programming and budgets, or the downfall in the quality of care that's being provided to students and patients and community members, or, and we've seen this for the last decade, shortages in education, shortages in nursing, shortages in physician, right? And when we're in a crisis space where there's not resources, we cheapen fixing the problem that we're not actually attending to, right? So,
yes. Yeah. We've got listeners who are just echoing what you're saying. Sabrina says, this sounds amazing for early childhood educators. My staff work year round. There's one winter break, but nothing intentional to support staff mental wellness. Yeah. Nancy says, yes, she's not going to stop talking about it either.
Thank you, Nancy.
Let's just say, yes, we have to keep the conversation going. Bertina says, I love the transparency and real information in this conversation. Lack of attention and care from employers is critical to the caregiver and to how the patient will receive best care. We literally were talking in a virtual session earlier today that there is an ethical imperative to our self-care and the accountability that we must be well. There's an ethical imperative to it, because you cannot do what you desire to do well if you aren't, and you keep ignoring it.
100%.
How can people, I know because they're waiting, so Veirdre, will you let her tell us how we can get in touch with them?
Yeah, so www.kindredwaywellness.org. There is a space there where you can sign up for our newsletter and updates. There's also a space there where you can reach out to us if you're interested in having a conversation, if you're interested in consulting, if you want to facilitate a Kindred Way community peer support group or bring one to your community. Land there, reach out to us. Our greatest need right now is that we need to develop a volunteer committee and organization, and we want that to be diverse. We want it to be representative of the different helping professions. I don't want to speak for people. I'm willing to advocate on their behalf. And so part of this experience in the compassionate confrontation is that I'm now challenging my fellows. Show up, I'm here, I'm doing it. Show up, Let's have this conversation. Help me drive this forward, right? I'm a one-woman show at the moment with an advisement committee that's made up of nurses, chaplains, doctors, beautiful people, and I'm still working 40 to 60 hours as a clinician in the community. So something that I have had to learn as a healing helper is I can't do it all, right? And I shouldn't. But I'm willing to put the stakes in the ground and build the community and be a voice forward if people are willing to get on board. So go to our website, send me a note, let's talk about it. We have a Facebook. We're working on a podcast. The way to reach out to us is online currently, and we begin a conversation there. I'll come to you, we'll facilitate virtually, whatever works. And it begins with a needs assessment of what do you need and what would you like this process to look like for you in this organization? And we go from there because it's different. Every culture of every ER, every culture of every school district, the steepings and the systems we work in as clinicians are all cultured very differently. And so the needs of folks, that's another thing we do in helping professions is that these assessments kind of ascribe needs and solutions, and we're asking you to participate in the development of them. We can't advocate forward to governing bodies without the input of your experience. So reach out and land it and give it to us so that we can represent you.
Yes. And there's a piece of that in there, and you referenced it earlier, to actually pause, to self-assess, to really gain the space to put to words what you need. Oftentimes our first response is, I don't know, but you actually do.
Sure.
If you allow yourself margin to actually articulate it.
Absolutely.
And now you are creating space for their voices to be amplified. And there's such a need.
There's such a need. And we deserve that.
Yeah.
We deserve that.
I need you to say that again.
It's a right.
Yes.
We are entitled, professional helpers are absolutely fundamentally entitled to high levels of accessible, truly trauma-informed, quality mental health and wellness supports. And anybody who argues that shouldn't be in these professions.
Right. But for them, I think we're always so forward facing out to the client that we're forgetting in order to do that well, we have the right to trauma-informed, high-quality support and care for our emotional, mental, and physical well-being. Yeah.
When the majority of an ER, when the majority of an elementary school, when the majority of a drug and alcohol clinic shows up to work emotionally or physically impaired or stops coming altogether, what will they do then when it's too late and the helpers are too burnt out and sick?
The system will reach for a radical solution, but we don't have to wait.
Right.
And the signal is already there. I just want to grab a couple of more. 15-year special education teacher, we are just now talking about year-round schooling. This may be an outlet for both teachers and students, being able to have more time and therefore build in. And so don't just talk about year-round classroom, but actually think about what does this mean for radical support and help, not just having time off, but actually having quality, holistic support during that time so that you can restore and refill. Tell the website one more time. Nancy put it into the chat. Nancy, we have missed you, friend. We have missed you. Welcome back. But share, and also share social media as well as website again for me, please.
So website is www.kindredwaywellness.org. You can email us at kindredwaywellness@gmail.com, and we are under Kindred Way Wellness Collective on Facebook. We do have an Instagram. It's a little sleepy. We're working on it. But we also do have an Instagram under the Kindred Way.
Nice.
Thank you so
friend,
much.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this conversation to the forefront. It won't be the last time because, as you shared, compassionate confrontation, especially in the face of moral injury, is going to require us to keep knocking at the door. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you know that there is currently a need inside, you are feeling tired, I want to say to you, you are not crazy. There actually is a word for it. Don't wait until you feel broken to actually ask for help. There are resources, there are supports. We will be providing more resources in the replay link, but you are not alone. As always, it is amazing to have authentic, safe conversations with experts in the field doing the work. We are getting ready to take a week or two off, but we want to wish you well during that time. And we want you to, if you've missed any of our healing conversations over the past, I want to say 6 weeks, this is an opportunity for you to invest in you. You are worth it. Ask for and get access to what you need. And we will see you in December right here, same time, same place. We'll see you in a couple of weeks on the flip side. Trauma, toxic stress, broken habits, and hurting heart don't define destiny, but peace isn't passive. It requires an exchange. To create a flip and access peace in the middle of the pieces, you are challenged to make an exchange of the lies that have kept you mentally hostage in basement moments. Resilience isn't about bouncing back, but bouncing forward. Living strong, the flip side of adversity, brings powerful stories and fearless conversations from experts in the field of business, relationships, emotional, physical, and mental health, and faith-based communities. Each episode creates a brave space with powerful tools from authentic connections. Tune in as we dig in with Dr. Jackson on the flip side of adversity.